going through all the questions that people are asking, I wonder if I could just start with a general question to both Jonathan and Ruby, which is, I guess, looking for hope, and wondered whether you felt there was anything that you'd spotted in either government or kind of community reaction to the current health emergency that you think might usefully be applied to the climate emergency. Is there something good that we can learn from what's happening just now? Maybe Jonathan, if I ask you first.
Sure. Definitely a lot to learn. I'm not one of those who thinks that we've got a whole amazing battery of silver linings to take away from COVID-19. It's pretty grim for a huge number of people, and it'll get a lot grimmer. But I think there are two things in particular. One, governments know what needs to be done when the emergency is in our faces. So this as a public health emergency has summoned up a massive amount of political will and huge amounts of money. I mean, even the test and trace system now has cost more than £12 billion. Unfortunately, it's been very badly deployed, but there we are. You can do these things when the national need is absolutely clear. And secondly, at the community level, whatever else has happened, and I hope this will last, we have been reminded very forcefully of the degree to which we're all much more dependent on each other at community levels, and which we all have obligations to look after those who are more vulnerable at any one stage. So I think there's a lot to take away from it, but definitely not to romanticize the silver linings bit.
That's great, thank you. Ruby, do you have anything to add? I notice you're still on mute.
Sorry. Maybe just how easy, I don't know if this is just how I feel, how easy it was to put rules in place, such as wearing masks, or just how easy it was for the government to put rules in place for the emergency, like Jonathan said, that was in our faces. But just because it's not as obvious where we are, the climate emergency, rules still should be getting put in place for things that we know are being destructive and that are constantly having a negative impact. I think that it's so easy to put rules in place for people to follow, and that this has proven that.
Yeah, that's great, thank you. Okay, we've got a question from Hilary Williams about farmers and food. Hilary, if you could just unmute and ask your question, please.
It's a question that came from someone else within our group. It's how can we, what input is there going into farmers to produce more food more sustainably, try and reduce impact on the climate and our soil, and I suppose it kind of extends also to how can we encourage more people to buy food which is produced more sustainably. I'm rambling a little bit here.
Thank you.
Yeah. No. Shall I leap in there, Judith?
Yes, please do. Thank you.
I hate to have to say this, but there is a real opportunity. I mean, we are going to be out of the Common Agricultural Policy come what may on January the 1st. That's a good thing. The CAP has been a bad thing. And unfortunately, the EU states have just renewed the CAP pretty much in its old worst form. We have somewhere between £2 and £3 billion a year to direct into farming to help farmers transition towards, as you were suggesting, Hilary, transition towards ways of farming that are much more beneficial for the environment, much more beneficial for the soil, for biodiversity, and for the quality of the food that we need. If we use that amount, which the Treasury has promised through to 2023, then it should be possible to work with farmers to make this transition. And the critical thing is to link it to the climate change emergency. We have to use every square inch of land in this country now in such a way as to help deliver that low carbon kind of prosperity rather than work against it. That's going to be a big challenge. Do we see that coming out of our political leaders at the moment in Whitehall and Holyrood? Not quite convinced on that as yet, but there's a lot to play for.
That's great, thank you. I'm going to move to the next question, which I'm going to ask Ruby to maybe respond to first, just to try and get through as many questions as possible. It's a question from Fran Lutz from your group. Fran, your question about how do you empower communities? Could you just unmute and ask your question, please?
Yeah, it's just asking how do we best support the energy of young people, and I suppose it's those of us in the group are aware that there are kind of peaks and troughs when you're involved in trying to change things, and it's very easy to get cynical and jaded and kind of lose hope. So there are lots of us around who've been through those different cycles. How do we support the energy that's there, because that really is the best hope for the future?
Ruby, have you got any thoughts on that you could share?
I would say it's all a bit difficult right now, because the strike for Friday, supporting that would have been really good, but obviously that's quite difficult to encourage people to go and strike with social distancing and stuff. But just sort of listening to young people and taking on their views, and I don't know, so just being as supportive as you can. Everything's been made a bit more difficult recently with COVID, so I'm not really sure how easy it is, but yeah, sorry. I don't know if Jonathan can add to that.
I think you said the single most important thing, to be honest, Ruby, which is not everybody is as sensitive as they need to be to young people when they're talking about this stuff. I've heard some dreadful exchanges between young and old people, which sort of amount pretty much to patronizing, or not quite dismissing, but talking down to. Just get the conversation going. Let young people talk about what they're feeling and how they see this, and be open to all of that. Honestly, that's as you said, Ruby, that's the single most important thing you can do.
Thank you very much. A question now from Ian Findlay about the top 2 things. Ian, could you unmute and ask your question, please?
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. Yes, so Comrie is a wee village. Got a population of about 2,500 people. So the question to the panel is what's the 2 top things that we can do as a small village in Scotland to help tackle a global climate emergency?
Great. Can I maybe start with Jonathan this time?
No, I think we start with Ruby this time. I know
was going to give her
about living in a small Scottish village. So.
Good. You mentioned some, Ruby, didn't you, in your presentation, but I wondered if you maybe could prioritize those, the top 2.
So I would say joining a group, because I think that things get done a lot faster when it's bigger groups, and it's a lot harder on your own when you don't have the support. But if you're in a group, then you can play off each other's strengths and you can use each other's knowledge, and I think it makes it a lot easier. So I think it's Climate Action Strathern in Comrie. Is that right, Alan? Or yeah. So in Comrie there's Climate Action Strathern, or even start up your own group. I would say would be the other most important. And maybe the second most important is what you do in your day-to-day life. So as you say, a small village like Comrie, but if everybody's taking action in their day-to-day life, cutting down on their plastic usage, if you think if every person in Comrie did that, just one simple thing, that can accumulate to a big difference.
Brilliant, thank you. Anything to add there, Jonathan?
Yep, that's good.
Perfect. Okay. Next question is from Kathy Tilbrook. Kathy, could you unmute? You've got a question about the economy.
Yeah, thank you. Our question was about, I'm just scrolling back up to remind myself what we said, whether we need a complete restructuring of our economic systems and also ways to address social and global inequality to properly tackle the climate emergency. And if so, how do we start to make this change?
Okay. Jonathan, could I ask you to respond to that, please?
There's a little question to keep us busy for a few minutes. Yeah, no, this is, I mean, Kathy, this is critical, because if we just go back to pre-COVID orthodoxies about more economic growth and more GDP and more competitiveness and international trade and all the rest of it, then the lessons of the pandemic will not have been learned. That is absolutely the case. So we need to start thinking really about how we finance this very different kind of economy, how we emphasize well-being as much as economic growth, how we start talking about more local based wealth creation, using local assets as well as what happens to the national economy. I think, Alan, you mentioned that your next meeting is going to look quite a lot at financing these alternative futures. And you've got Fran coming from Positive Money, who has her fingers absolutely on the pulse of this alternative economic system story, which is really critical. The one thing I know right now is that we just must not go back to what we had before March 2020. We just have to find ways of bringing in these alternatives, which are powerful and really strong. And in the first instance, therefore, that means finding the money that we need for the Green New Deal type rebuilding our economies.
Great, thank you very much. We've got a great question here from Andrew Donaldson's group. Andrew, if you could ask this on behalf of your group about changing anger to hope.
Yeah, so yeah, we had a bit of a discussion about feeling overwhelmed and how to get other people on board and where to start. And we brought that down to a question about how do we change anger and impotence into hope?
That's a great question. Ruby, can I ask you to respond to that, please?
Yeah, I don't know. I think everybody's different, but I personally find that when I'm angry, I'm more motivated to make a change. And then I know that the changes that I'm making will be making a difference. So if you get a group of motivated people who are motivated through anger, or who find the anger, like come together over the anger, if that makes sense, I don't know, or come together over the motivation, I think even that in itself, the fact that you've come together, is hope in itself, that there is still groups of people finding each other to go forward. I don't know if...
Yeah, that seems to be a really strong theme that is coming through today, is the power of the collective and finding your people, and maybe not trying to feel so isolated, joining with others to bring about change.
Yeah, I mean, I touch it quite a lot on that theme of anger in my book, In Hope in Hell, because I don't think we're going to be able to do this transition without quite a lot of anger in the emotional range that we have. And actually, I refer on a couple of occasions to what I call intergenerational rage. It does seem to me that as young people begin to understand more and more about what we've inflicted on them through to the end of this century and beyond, it's inevitable that young people are going to feel really quite deep anger and pain at the loss of what they might otherwise have expected in this beautiful world of ours. So the trick then is to use that anger as creatively as possible, and to keep it as a source, a wellspring of the hope that we need to be effective campaigners. Only one thing I'd just comment on quickly. Martin Luther King spoke a lot about the ways in which anger was not enough to generate the movement about civil rights in America. He talked a lot about combining anger with an urge to redemption, to finding ways of building the bridges between people to allow them to use that anger very constructively. And we've got a similar situation here. We've got a generational divide. We get young people now coming to understand what my generation, our generations have done to betray their future. And we have to have redemptive processes between young and old to make that anger really positive.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. I just wondered, and sorry, we haven't talked about doing this, but if we've still got Ruby and Dougie on the in the meeting, I just wondered if either of you had any reflections or comments or points that you wanted to make in response to the questions that have been asked so far. If you do, feel free to just unmute and tell us what you think.
Well, I was just going to say a couple of things that really need to stop in Scotland are road building, because especially during coronavirus, they've said we've not got enough money to restart furlough or anything because they're too busy building new roads, and the roads going from Dunkeld to Perth, we don't actually need a dual carriageway, we don't need a road at all, we're just building it for no reason. And there's false advertising in Roxdown car park saying it's an electric A9 or something, when most like 60% of the cars on that road are not electric. I'm just going to add to that, 90 seconds quicker getting to Perth, that's not needed. when you're killing nearly a lot of, you're killing a lot of animals, releasing a lot of carbon, just to go to a place 9 seconds quicker, just leave earlier. And all the trees and taking away land, and people who are like trying to be good for the environment and stuff.
Sure, great, thank you.
One of the main problems is road building.
Yeah, okay, good. Thank you very much, both. We've got another question here from Hugh Rose. It's a question for Jonathan about carbon savings and population increase. Hugh, could you unmute and ask Jonathan your question, please?
Yes. If we manage to halve our carbon footprint by 2050, will all that effort have been wasted if we double the world's population over the same period? And what can be done about it?
Yes, is the short answer to that question. And we do have to think about the number of people for whom we're now trying to fashion these just and compassionate solutions in a low carbon world. Because if we see human numbers, if we see the human population go on growing through to the end of this century, it just by definition gets harder and harder. There's a very simple phrase that says more feet, more heat. So the more people we have on this planet, the greater the likelihood that we will increase those difficulties. Now, I'm seriously committed to encouraging people to think intelligently about what we do about population, which is all to do with family planning. It's all to do with ways in which we can improve the lot of the 270 million women in this world who don't have access to contraception, and so on and so forth. All of that good human rights-based stuff. I'm also very aware that we have to stress the overconsumption as well as the overpopulation story. These two things are two sides of the same coin, but we must start talking more intelligently about the population issue. Too many environmentalists these days, I'll be honest, are too scared to start talking about it because they think it's too controversial.
Thank you. Andrew Donaldson has a question about tipping points to change public perception. Or Andrew Donaldson's group, sorry.
Yes, yeah, definitely from the group. What is a tipping point to help change public perceptions of the climate emergency? In kind of in the same way that, you know, public perceptions change to do with cigarettes and smoking, and also to do with wearing seatbelts in cars in the last, you know, 20 or so years.
I don't know which of you would like to answer that. Jonathan, do you want to go first?
I'm happy to jump in. Good question, because just as we've got tipping points in natural systems, so we need tipping points in our human systems, in our social and economic systems. It's absolutely critical. In the book, I talk about this wonderful American research which identified just 3.5% of a population being the minimum number needed to get real action going on socially progressive causes like this. It's a lovely piece of work. As long as 50% of people in the country support the 3.5% of people who are doing the active campaigning. The idea of getting 3.5% as your tipping point sounds pretty manageable. And there really is a question about this, because as more and more people come to internalize urgency, the fact this is now, not tomorrow, we do get closer and closer to that tipping point. And I suspect we're much closer to it now than many slightly gloomy, pessimistic people think. I think we're quite close to that tipping point already.
That's great, thank you. We are getting towards the end of our session, and I know that Jonathan needs to leave promptly at 12:15. So maybe the last question, or we maybe try and squeeze another one in. We heard from Ruby earlier about the power of using kind of creativity in her community with the Bunting project. Alison Ritchie, you've got a question about using visual media to uplift people. I wondered if you'd like to ask that.
Hi, yeah. Our group talked a lot about how you get messaging across and how powerful a lot of the, you know, the daily bulletins of our leaders talking about, giving strong and really kind of galvanizing support from the country around issues during the pandemic. And we wondered how could we galvanise support through visual media to get through to a wide audience, to get these messages about the climate emergency across, but also to do it in a way that's quite uplifting and to gather positive stories and hopeful stories so that people don't feel overwhelmed and feel they have to look away, and just, yeah, to get people working together and connecting.
Yeah, great. Ruby, could I ask you to, if you've got any thoughts on that question, please?
Yeah, I think that so it's nice that you're saying that there should be uplifting things, because quite a lot of the visual stuff is always quite gloomy and there's more to like scare people into changing. So the uplifting stuff, so for example, our bunting story from our local community is just one story. So it's finding stories like that and sharing it. And also the climate strikes and stuff, it's finding stories of things that have happened. Like I say, we're only one small community that have done stuff. There's communities out with in so many areas that have done so much stuff. So it's finding these stories and sharing them, because quite a lot of these stories never leave the community. So yeah.
Sounds great.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. We are perilously close to time, so I just wonder whether I would like to express a huge thank you to our 4 fantastic speakers, to Jonathan, to Ruby and Dougie, and I wondered, would everyone be able to please unmute their microphone, and can we just give them a huge round of applause today, please?
Judith, before you cut us all off, if I may,
awesome.
Thank you, everybody. It's been a lovely time to spend with you. I just want to make one recommendation about positive visions, because I totally agree with Ruby on that. But something I discovered a couple of years ago was a really brilliant depiction of what a good future might look like from America, voiced by the rather amazing Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who has been so active in the climate movement over there and supported by young climate activists across the whole of America for her advocacy around the Green New Deal. And I'm just struggling to remember the title of it, but she voiced this brilliant piece, just 7 minutes long, looking at what our world would look like in 2050 if we now implemented all the things that we know we have to implement. So if you just Google Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez future vision, it'll pop up. And I promise you, it'll be 7 minutes that you will really love. So I hope that's a good PS to everything. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. But,
no, thank you.
Alice might enjoy that.
Perfect. I was going to ask you both, both Jonathan and Ruby, for any final reflections. So actually, thank you very much for doing that. Ruby, is there any final message that you would like to give everyone today?
I just hope that everybody listened to wee Ruby and Dougie, because I think young people have such a good outlook of it, and you can just see how simple it actually is, and they put it in such a simple way. We don't need 90 seconds taken off of our journey. So I'd really encourage you to open your views more to young people, just like Ruby and Dougie, because it's so amazing to listen to them. Yeah.
I quite agree, and I'm looking at some of the comments that are coming through in the chat, that just hugely appreciative of the contribution that you've made, and people saying how incredibly eloquent the young speakers are. So so thank you very much. And I think we all remember that we heard about the One Child, One Tree, One Future campaign here. So if anybody would like to get behind that, I believe that there's a project plan already in place. You heard it here first at Comrie Conversations. It feels like this is a campaign that we should all be trying to get behind and helping to make succeed. So thank you very much again to all the speakers. The recordings of the contributions will be on the Comrie Conversations Facebook page and on the YouTube channel. Please do give us your feedback on future topics, future speakers, any ideas on how a better structure might work, any improvements. We're really open to hearing how you found it, and any suggestions you've got for the future. Help us improve, please. Jonathan mentioned the next event, which will be Sunday, the 15th of November. And the question is, can we afford a green recovery? I've got 2 great speakers for that, who are Gemma Bone Dodds, who is a political economist with the Finance Innovation Lab, who are committed to a public good banking system, and Fran Lote, who's the Executive Director of Public Money, which is a think tank committed to a banking system to support a fair and green banking system. So 1 minute after 12:15, my apologies. Thank you all very much indeed for your participation, for listening, for contributing, and for all the great questions. Hope you'll join us for some future events, and have a great afternoon. The sun is not quite out, but the rain is not as bad as it was, so hopefully you can enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you very much to Alan and his team behind the scenes and on social media for pulling all this together again for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well
Thank
done.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
It's great.
Bye.
Thank you.
Well done.
Bye.
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 Thank you. Bye.
Well done.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.